Alright, this game is from 2007 and we have Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces, world champion of course, versus Teimour Radjabov with the black pieces, both very strong players indeed. Let's go. This game started off e4 for Magnus, d6. So we have a Philidor Defense named after Radjabov. The idea of this move is to inhibit the move e4, e4, e5, and then after this pawn is frozen here is to attack the fixed object with knight f6 as opposed to knight f6 right away. We have Philidor Defense, different opening altogether. d6 is almost attempting to be an improved version of the Philidor Defense. And this is one of those openings that is also a rare guest at top grandmaster level, so it is fun when you see these players adopting it. d4, classical response, building the two-pawn center, taking the space. As you can see, white occupies 4 ranks, black occupies 3 ranks. Knight f6, attacking the e-pawn. Knight c3, protecting and developing at the same time, so a nice economical move there. e5. Now normally g6 is played in a Pyrrhic, the idea of bringing the bishop to g7, castling on the king side. But this is a variation also of the Pyrrhics, e5. And it has some similarities to the Berlin defense in that it offers white the chance to go into an early end game. For example, d takes e5, d takes e5, queen takes d8 check, king d8, and for example, bishop g5, c6, in order to tuck the king away, anticipating this check after castles queenside, king c7, let's say knight f3, and knight bd7. And we see a typical endgame that is often reached in this position. And surprisingly enough, black is able to hold that position most times. It's not an easy endgame to win for white. So most players at higher levels, they maintain the tension by simply threatening to win the e-pawn outright after knight f3 instead of simplifying the position so early. So Radjabov continued, strong pointing his center, knight bd7. And normally black doesn't want to give up his center. White is trying to induce this capture so that he can have more control in the center and reduce black's influence in the center. So black is trying to strengthen e5. Bishop c4, normal developing move on the diagonal, putting pressure on the f7 pawn. So black has to be mindful of those type of moves. Knight g5 with further influence on f7, which is a common theme in king pawn openings, is the attack on f7. Bishop e7, preparing castling. So we can see that black has a modest position, but a very solid position. This is the type of game you play as black when you're trying to avoid preparation and you just want to get a playable position. So black is giving up a spatial advantage, but his position is pretty solid, and the moves are easy enough to find. However, he does suffer from some space disadvantages in that he can't really get his pieces to good squares as of yet. For instance, this bishop is strictly a defensive piece here, as it's blocked in by its own pawns. This bishop is not too happy. Of course, this rook is not happy. That tells us that this knight has to move again at some point. And this knight will come to b6 sometime, and sometime it'll come to c5 in order to get this guy out. So that's the price you pay when you allow your opponent, allow the player to cramp you. You suffer from lack of space. Is that sometimes you have to do some maneuvering just in order to get your piece to a good square. Whereas when you do have space, it's easy to find good squares for your pieces. For instance, the knights just come here naturally. Bishop comes here. It's pretty easy. This bishop will go here, sometimes g5, and the rooks will find places in the center, where with the black position, it's not really clear where the pieces will end up. So castles, rook e1, fortifying this pawn in the center. c6. Now the idea here, sometimes black will play queen c7 in order to connect the rooks. Sometimes the queen will come to b6, putting pressure here and here. Sometimes b5 is played, and b4, attacking this knight and driving him from the protection of the e pawn. And that's why another reason why this rook is useful on the e file. a4, designed to stop b4, b5. So there's a5. Now the difference here between the white and black's moves is that at least black has the b5 square protected for now, so no piece can go on this square. Meanwhile, black has access to white's b4 square. The bishop moves to a2, perhaps anticipating knight coming here, attacking this square, and then freeing the bishop, say with g4 or even bishop e6. So e takes d4. Now this is a critical point in the game already, because Radjabov, being cramped, he decides to relinquish his center, and in return he gets access to these squares for his knight. But again, the downside of that is he gives up his central influence, and also there's a weak pawn left here on d6 that can be targeted for white. So although that was played, there's different moves that can be played here, like waiting moves. For instance, h6, still holding on to this center. Move like rook e8, even rook b8 can be played. Queen c7, queen b6. There are options, and play would just continue on. Radjabov plays e takes d4, knight takes d4, and we see a clear target for white now on d6. And we will see as the game goes on the build up against this pawn. Knight c5, that's what Black wanted to liberate his pieces. Queen f3. This is all about pressure against d5 here, making sure this pawn will not liberate itself without penalty. Queen b6. Ideas of discovery against this knight here that's unprotected, and also eyeing this b pawn in case this bishop wants to go somewhere. So for example, bishop e3, queen takes b2, and this is on prise. And perhaps after bishop d2, there's queen b6. So bishop g5 is played by Magnus, and if you notice the difference in the position, the variation I showed you was with bishop e3, and notice how after this move this knight is not protected because the bishop is here. Magnus played bishop g5, so the queen is still protecting the knight. So now if queen takes b2, that would be a big blunder, because after rook a b1, queen a3, and knight d5, white will be winning. So for example, queen takes a2, knight takes e7 check, king h8, and bishop takes f6, and white is just winning here. Black is busted in this position. For example, after g takes f6, just queen takes f6, checkmate. Okay, that's so after bishop g5, his pawn is taboo. It's a poison pawn. Radjabov is a very strong grandmaster. He sees that, and he plays bishop e6. And black has handled this position well. He was cramped at the beginning, and he has still found decent places for his pieces. Rooks are connected, and only weakness he really has is this d6 pawn. But he's doing a good job not allowing himself to get pushed off the board. Okay, knight takes e6. Knight takes e6. Now another imbalance is created. Now we see white has a bishop pair along with this space advantage. Okay, so that's two small advantages. This is a great game, so just hang in there. So that's two small advantages for white here. Again, black looks fine, but watch the accumulation of advantages. Now Carlsen offers an endgame to black. Black says, definitely, I'll take that. Bishop takes e3. Now, do you think Carlsen was trying to draw here? Excuse me. Of course not. He realized he has the two bishops, slight weakness there, and he has a target to attack there. Easy plan. Rooks to the d file, double up, and attack this pawn. Knight g4. Do you think Carlsen gave up the bishop here? Do you think Carlsen allowed this capture? Of course not. Bishop d2. Bishop h4. I'm not impressed by this move. This is like a beginner's looking move right here. g3. driving the bishop away, of course. Bishop goes on to a nice diagonal. But what I like here is how white reorganizes his position. He maintains the same features that gave him the positional advantage, because white has an advantage, but it's very slight advantage. Like I said, it consists of this pawn being backwards here on d6 and having the bishop here. So white is simply in the process of restructuring his pieces and pawns as to eliminate counterplay from black. That's the first thing. So what he has to do is basically maintain his advantages and strengthen his position. That's basically what white is trying to do right now. So king g2. So that's why you see these moves that look kind of inconsequential. What black wants to do is play f3, drive this guy out of there, and then the pawns on the king side are situated. He doesn't have to worry about any attack. Then he has to take care of the situation with this b pawn and getting these pieces into the game and off this diagonal. Nice e5. So of course we see a little pressure here and here. Bishop hops out to c4. More pressure on the pawn. f3. Knight e5. And bishop jumps to e2. So notice how Magnus is keeping the bishop here, which is one of the major assets in the position, and this pawn is still where it is, in spite of all those moves that have been made. The basic features in the position that white claims is an advantage have stayed exactly the same. So we saw a lot of moves, but notice the grip on those advantages. You can't lose those little advantages that you get. They're hard to come by in chess. Don't give them up. And meanwhile, white wants to solve his minor problems here, because black would love to come to this square, harassing this pawn right here. So this bishop is good. It's doing defensive duty right now. So knight d7, b3. Again, consolidation, solidifying. Now the next step is to get this rook off of a1. Knight e6. Now Radjabov is trying to generate counterplay. He wants to bring the knight there on d4 and attack this. So that's why Carlsen plays rook a c1. He would probably like his rook there, but it's not time for that yet. First, he has to make sure his position is rock solid. There it is, knight d4. Does he allow black to take the bishop here? Of course not. Keeps his bishops. Bishop f1. Here comes the other knight to e5. You see the double attack. So you might say, man, now he has to protect the pawn with the bishops. So now he's going to at least have to give up the bishop here. Nope. Rook e3. So he says, I'm willing to give up my rook for two pieces. So Radjabov plays knight e6. So we see this cat and mouse game. But like I said, through all these moves, notice the same features. The two standout features of the position that give white that slight advantage. So knight e2. So finally clears the diagonal. And if you've been following my videos for a while, you would know this is one of the ways to deal with bishops. Not only fianchetto bishops, but just bishops in general. The three ways are: one is to block the bishop, two, trade it off, Or 3, the scorched earth policy, which is to leave nothing on the diagonal for the bishop to hit. And we see number 3 in place, the scorched earth policy. The bishop looks impressive on f6, but there's nothing there. d5. So you might be like, wait a minute. You've been saying white has this advantage of the backward d6 pawn, blah, 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 and the 2 bishops. And look at that now. Black has liberated itself. Well, not so fast. Because now, watch what happens. One advantage just turns to another advantage. After e takes d5, c takes d5, now we have the isolated pawn. Black still has a weakness. And this is even more pronounced because now a pawn island is being created when there was none. So now you have these 2 pawns. That's a pawn island. That's an island by itself. And now you got 3 pawn islands just like that. So suffice it to say that I feel this move was incorrect. It's premature. Of course, he would like to play rook a to d8, but this pawn is not protected. Perhaps rook e d8 is correct with this idea. And at least he can recapture the pawn with the rook. And of course, then white may have to respond with knight c3 in order to allow that pawn to become isolated in case of the push. But after knight c3, maybe Radjabov could have just went for a repetition of moves. So d5 seems kind of hasty. C takes d5, c takes d5. So now you got all kind of weakness here. Let's see. Bishop c3. So now we see piece threatened and the bishop's opposing on the diagonal. But the other thing is doing, the bishop is doing on c3, is taking over the d4 square. Blockade. Blockade, blockade, blockade. Fixing the pawn so it can be attacked later. Knight d7. See how this pawn has been protected and secured. Now the rook has finished its duty on c1, and now it goes here. Attack mode. Bishop takes c3. Rook takes c3. And if you understand about isolated pawns, you will know that the person that has the isolated pawn should not want to trade pieces. They should be trying to keep the pieces on the board. Why? Because the isolated pawn can only be protected by pieces. So therefore, the player that trades his pieces, he gains an advantage in that there's less pieces to protect the isolated pawn. And at the end, in the pure king and pawn endgame, the only way to protect the isolated pawn is with the king. So usually, strategically, the one with the isolated pawn is trying to push that pawn, use the open files to attack, and generally have a dynamic position. In this game, we see the worst side of the isolated pawn. We see that it's white who is active and attacking. White's rook possesses the open c file, and we see that he also is attacking the isolated pawn. So he has like the best of both worlds, and black is trading pieces, which helps white get closer to a favorable endgame. If my pawns look like this, in contrast to white's pawns, I'm not trying to get to a quick endgame so that I can lose. So rook takes c3 was played. Knight f6, protecting the pawn. Why? Because the piece has to protect it. There's no other way. Nice move. King coming to the center, preparing for the ending. Rook AC8. So now Radjabov wants to take over the file. Rook D2. Nice prophylactic move. Anticipating pressure on the C file. King F8. Great move. Finally finding a job for the bishop. Rook takes C3. Another piece is traded. And Carlsen is happy about that. Now we have two pieces attacking. The D4 pawn, D5 pawn, excuse me, and only one protecting. What does that mean? So Radjabov is relying on tactics. So he still leaves this not adequately protected, but he challenges the bishop here. Bishop simply just drops back. Now, black would love to have that square, but white is never going to move this F3 pawn as long as that's possible. Again, Radjabov does not want to defend this pawn. He realizes he has to be active, so he just challenges the the knight. And hopefully you can see that if knight takes, rook takes, and then rook C2 check, and that's no good for white. This is why he plays knight B5. And notice the anticipation of Carlsen moves earlier when he played the move rook to D2. He anticipated all this. So rook's protected. Knight goes up to an outpost. And remember when I said earlier in the game, when this move A5 was first played, let's go back for a second. When A5 was first played, I was making a note of how this square was still protected, but white's wasn't protected. Now we go forward. Let's move forward a little bit. And just get to the main position. And now we see how this pawn has been transferred here. And it also left this B5 square vulnerable. So that's further confirmation that the move D5 was bad by Radjabov. So now you have rook to C5. Rook E2. And this is one of the things, one of the benefits too, is when you're attacking an object and the opponent is focusing on all of his resources on defending, sometimes you can switch the attack to something else, and many times the opponent is not able to recover in time. So now he just simply switches to the open file. So rook E2. And one of the ideas I like is H4. It's knocking this guy out. So knight E6. Radjabov anticipates that. There's bishop H3 again. This time he's threatening to win a pawn. Knight G5. Oh, would Radjabov love a draw here. Carlsen plays bishop F5. G6. H4. Nice move by Carlsen, inducing more weakness. So now Radjabov has to accept double pawns or lose a pawn. So instead, he plays knight takes f3, keep the material even. King takes f3, and then g takes f5. So now, believe it or not, Radjabov has won a pawn. Right? Count the pawns: 3, 4, 5, 6. But these are very bad pawns. And Carlsen easily understands that he can win those pawns whenever he gets ready. So that move, and I'm sure Radjabov understands that his position is precarious also. But he tried to, he did the best thing he thought he could do. The other alternative was taking here and then allowing that move with tempo on the knight. Then, maybe the knight goes here or something like that. And white is better there. So Radjabov decided, hey, I might as well get a pawn out of the deal. But his position is real shaky. But the point of this game is to show the gradual improvement in the position, starting out with small advantages. Remember at the beginning, what were the two advantages white held? The bishop pair and the backward pawn on d6. Then it turned, with black's help of course, to an isolated pawn on d5. Then it turned into pawn islands, right? And now look at the position. Now probably a beginning player probably can win this position. Let's see how it continued. So knight d4, there's a blockade. Knights are the best for blockading isolated pawns. Not only does it blockade the pawn, but it also protects the pawn on c2, and this rook is free to do what it wants to do. King g7, and the pawn drops ingloriously. So there was no way to protect it. After g takes f5, knight d4, no way to protect it. So white quickly restores a material advantage and now has a big advantage as the pawn structure of black is totally compromised. So let's keep going. Radjabov attacks the knight. Magnus played knight e7 check. I like this move, g4, followed by king f4, and then followed by h5. I like those type of moves, but nothing wrong with knight e7, king g7. There it is, g4, h6, king f4. So it's kind of like he did my idea, but in a different order, maybe more forcing order. Knight f4, and this is just about domination, just create space, taking more and more space, and then the king at any time will be ready to shoot right over to the queen side. h5. Magnus just takes. Now he could have played g5, right? Then maybe that would happen. g4, and you have moves like knight f5 check, perhaps king g6, but no need. And then rook e8 is good, but no need to enter into those complications if you see a clearer win. So he just takes the pawn, and there it is. Notice this king's in the center, this king's off to the king side. This pawn must be stopped, so it's gonna preoccupy at least one of black's units in stopping it, whether it's the knight, the king, or the rook. And isolated pawn is gonna fall. This knight is already attacking it, the king is on it. It's extremely vulnerable. b6. Notice Magnus does not rush. He just puts another unit on it. Desperation, f6. King makes further progress. King is just on the 6th rank. Just walking around Black's house like he owns it now. Magnus is saying, this is my house now. I own this house. This is good property right here. I like where we live. It's like he moved in. You know, it's like he's sitting on his couch with his feet up and all of that. Just hanging out. So King D6, desperation, D4. Of course, the idea is Rook takes. Rook takes. Knight D5. Can you see the attack? Just attack, attack, attack. He pushes again. And this shows you the strength of Magnus. He could have took the pawn, right? Easily. But Magnus do not give any kind of hope. Because Magnus says, listen, I'm not allowing to trade with you or nothing. I'm not even weakening my position. I'm just gonna take the pawn. He plays C4. Now he has no way of getting into the position with the rook, and the pawn still getting rocked anyway. So Rook C8. Pawn falls in an inglorious manner. F5. Where's this guy going? I guess this pawn didn't learn from what happened to the D pawn. That if you try to run without protection, you just get captured. So the king jumps on that. Where you going? If the pieces could talk, the king be like, where are you going? Like, oh, you want to run? That's hanging. This also on breeze. Knight takes f4, check. He's like, hey, wait a minute, can Radjabov win the knight somehow? Of course not. Knight e6, check. Stops the check. Checks the king. Now we have a 2-pawn advantage. And Radjabov decides to enter into a lost king and pawn ending. You see the fork. Right? There it is, check. So a noble game by Radjabov, but just too much position, too many positional mistakes by Radjabov. And again, he has the piece, but it's over. At the C5, he resigned. That knight will have to sacrifice itself for this pawn eventually. Remember, I was telling you that this pawn on H4 has to be guarded by one unit at least. In this case, will be the king. This king would have to stop this pawn. This knight would have to sacrifice itself for the C5 pawn. And then there's nobody left to take care of this pawn, which means this would be your queen right here. Hope you thoroughly enjoyed that game. Like, subscribe, ask questions, and comment, all of that stuff. So let's keep learning chess together. All right, see you on the next one.